Okay, I think. Oh, 1 second. Testing. Test. There we go. We've got that up. Yeah. So I'm getting access to these public domain books through Project Gutenberg, and they are pretty. It's a pretty cool site. Hello, Justin. How are you doing today? Hype, hype, hype. Well, hopefully it goes as well. We'll see. Um, I'm thinking because they're segmented pretty off. We'll see how it goes. For this one, I'll take a break after each letter or each chapter because the introduction is done by letters. How did your exams go, by the way, Justin? I remember you still said you had some tests left the last time we talked. They went fine? Excellent. Awesome. And then after each segment, depending on how long it took, I'm probably going to have maybe 5 to 10 minutes for just chatting time. So when I am narrating, I won't be responding to chat. I will be reading it for sure, but I won't be like responding. Got 2 weeks left, including this, and then does the second. Oh, very nice, Justin. Congratulations. Done. Not yeah. Um, and then I will reply once each section ends the chat, and then we'll just have like a just chatting segment. And we'll see how this goes. I'm gonna try to make the streams a little bit more interesting. All right. So, I will also reserve the liberty to change books however I please. My goal is to read through a full and proper book. However, not every book has aged too well. I was going to start with A War of the Worlds, but it yeah, no. I got like halfway through the first chapter, and I'm like, okay. Um, maybe not on a live stream. Yeah, maybe not. Um, like excellently written, definitely written in a different time period. Um, so Frankenstein or A Modern Prometheus by Mary Wollstonecraft. Letter 1. To Mrs. Saville, England. St. Petersburg, December 11th, 17. Okay, that doesn't give me any numbers, but I'll repeat. You will rejoice to hear that no disaster has accompanied the commencement of an enterprise which you have regarded with such evil forebodings. I arrived here yesterday, and my first task is to assure my dear sister of my welfare, and increasing confidence in the success of my undertaking. I am already far north of London, and as I walk in the streets of Petersburg, I feel a cold northern breeze play upon my cheeks, which braces my nerves and fills me with delight. Do you understand this feeling? This breeze, which has travelled from the regions towards which I am advancing, gives me a foretaste of those icy climes. Inspired by this wind of promise, my daydreams become more fervent and vivid. I try in vain to be persuaded that the pole is the seat of frost and desolation. It ever presents itself to my imagination as the region of beauty and delight. There, Margaret, the sun is forever visible, its broad disk just skirting the horizon and diffusing a perpetual splendor. There, for with your leave, my sister, I will put some trust in preceding navigators. There, snow and frost are banished, and, sailing over a calm sea, we may be wafted to a land surpassing in wonders and in beauty every region hitherto discovered on the habitable globe. Its productions and features may be without example, as the phenomena of the heavenly bodies undoubtedly are in those undiscovered solitudes. what may not be expected in a country of eternal light. I may there discover the wondrous power which attracts the needle, and may regulate 1,000 celestial observations that require only this voyage to render their seeming eccentricities consistent forever. I shall satiate my ardent curiosity with the sight of a part of the world never before visited, and may tread a land never before imprinted by the foot of man. These are my enticements, and they are sufficient to conquer all fear of danger or death, and to induce me to commence this laborious voyage with the joy a child feels when he embarks in a little boat with his holiday mates on an expedition of discovery up his native river. But supposing all these conjectures to be false, you cannot contest the inestimable benefit which I shall confer upon all mankind, to the last generation, by discovering a passage near the pole to those countries, to reach which at present so many months are requisite, or by ascertaining the secret of the magnet, which, if at all possible, can only be effected by undertaking such as mine. These reflections have dispelled the agitation with which I began my letter, and I feel my heart glow with an enthusiasm which elevates me to heaven, for nothing contributes so much to tranquillize the mind a steady purpose, a purpose on which the soul may fix its intellectual eye. This expedition has been the favorite dream of my early years. I have read with ardor the accounts of the various voyages which have been made in the prospect of arriving at the North Pacific Ocean, through the seas which surround the pole. You may remember that a history of all the voyages made for purposes of discovery comprised the whole of our good Uncle Thomas's library. My education was neglected, yet I was passionately fond of reading. These volumes were my study day and night, and my familiarity with them increased that regret which I had felt, as a child, on learning that my father's dying injunction had forbidden my uncle to allow me to embark in a seafaring life. These visions faded when I perused, for the first time, those poets whose effusions entranced my soul and lifted it to heaven. I also became a poet, and for 1 year lived in a paradise of my own creation. I imagined that I also might obtain a niche in the temple where the names of Homer and Shakespeare are consecrated. You are well acquainted with my failure, and how heavily I bore the disappointment, but just at that time I inherited the fortune of my cousin, and my thoughts were turned to the channel of their earlier bent. 6 years have passed since I resolved on my present undertaking. I can, even now, remember the hour from which I dedicated myself to this great enterprise. I commenced by inuring my body to hardship. I accompanied the whale fishers on several expeditions to the North Sea. I voluntarily endured cold, famine, thirst, and want of sleep. I often worked harder than the common sailors during the day, and devoted my nights to the study of mathematics, the theory of medicine, and those branches of physical science from which a naval adventurer might derive the greatest practical advantage. Twice I actually hired myself as an undermate in a Greenland whaler, and acquitted myself to admiration. I must own I feel a little proud when my captain offered me the second dignity in the vessel, and entreated me to remain with the greatest earnestness, so valuable did he consider my services. And now, dear Margaret, do I not deserve to accomplish some great purpose? My life might have been passed in ease and luxury, but I preferred glory to every enticement that wealth placed upon my path. Oh, that some encouraging voice would answer in the affirmative! My courage and my resolution is firm, but my hopes fluctuate, and my spirits are often depressed. I am about to proceed on a long and difficult voyage, the emergencies of which will demand all of my fortitude. I am required not only to raise the spirits of others, but sometimes to sustain my own when theirs are falling. This is the most favorable period for traveling in Russia. They fly quickly over the snow in their sledges. The motion is pleasant and, in my opinion, far more agreeable than that of an English stagecoach. The cold is not excessive, and if you are wrapped in furs, a dress which I have already adopted, for there is a great difference between walking the deck and remaining seated motionless for hours, when no exercise prevents the blood from actually freezing in your veins. I have no ambition to lose my life on the post road between St. Petersburg and Archangel. I shall depart for the latter town in a fortnight, or 3 weeks, and my intention is to hire a ship there, which can easily be done by paying the insurance for the owner. and to encourage as many sailors as I think necessary among those who are accustomed to the whale fishing. I do not intend to sail until the month of June. And when shall I return? Ah, dear sister, how can I answer this question? If I succeed, many, many months, perhaps years, will pass before you and I may meet. If I fail, you will see me again soon, or never. Farewell, my dear, excellent Margaret. Heaven shower down blessings upon you, and save me, that I may again and again testify my gratitude for all your love and kindness. Your affectionate brother, R. Walton. And break. That was about 10 minutes, so we will just be chatting for 10 minutes. How have you been, by the way? Aside from resting, aside from exams, just how's life been, Justin? Oh, well, thank you. Just been existing? I see. Now, you were studying horticulture, right? And if I remember correctly, you even got a nice rare tree recently. How's that been growing? Yes, okay. Let's see. Nice. I've been trying to brainstorm without much success what to talk about during the just chatting parts of it when it's quiet, so that the VOD isn't just me kind of like going nothing into the microphone for 10 minutes. Now, in theory, if there isn't any talk, I can just go back to narration, but I do want to have segments mean for their segments. Also picked up a couple of others, a choke cherry and a hornbeam. Nice. What is a choke cherry? I'm assuming it's a tree because the others, the first one was a tree. What does that look like? Also, are these the same person? Sarville, yes, Mrs. Sarville. Ah, you'll have to see once it comes up. Makes sense. I think I will need to look for some sort of background music to fill for the just chatting segments. It's a tough decision because you don't want like anything beyond casual ambiance for narration background unless you're specializing it specifically to the chapter, which doesn't really work in this context. Oh, they were a gift. Nice. That's awesome. Yep. But yeah, no. Do you want to know? Uh not probably not even something worth broaching on stream, but it is surprising though how multisyllabic the prose is in these older narratives, particularly the ones that are like, Frankenstein or War of the Worlds. They're all very tailored towards using long words, which it's kind of interesting to see how the times have changed. Now, I've heard, like, for example, I had a professor when I was in university, and he was not happy with how, in his opinion, language had degraded into becoming more shorthand, shorter words, more slang, etc., etc. Um, yeah, I love that this was like a bet. I love that so much. It became such a famous book. Um, but I think it's more complicated than that. Like, yes, there's a certain elegance to these words and aspect of it, but at the end of the day, it's still just a fancier way to say the same thing. And as times have changed, things have become faster paced. If you're looking, if you have a time period where you have, seasons with more free time, where there's not much you can do, you can't farm, you can't really, the elements have not been tamed, so to speak. You want to, and you are handwriting something, there is a natural inclination to make it something more special because you're handwriting or you're typing it out or you're doing manuscripts. It's not as quick a medium. And you have times where you're kind of just sitting and reflecting on what you want to say. And you're not used to consuming medium quickly either. So you are mentally inundated, I suppose, to want to be somewhat long-winded about your approach. And you see these long, long paragraphs. But compared to today, it's designed to be so much faster pace. And, people always criticize like, oh, attention span diminishing, etc., etc. But I don't know. I feel like it really shows the different levels and styles and rate of consumption between eras. And I'm not sure. I certainly think it's more complicated than saying there's a degradation. I think there are pros and cons to both. Like, when I read these older stories, it forces you to take your time a bit more. You can't just rush through. But I don't know. It's hard to describe. What do you think? Question. Yes. What is your question? I'm assuming it's being written out. I should scroll this back up and prepare for letter 2. Oh, this one's a shorter one. That one is a proper short one. Probably do 2 and 3 together, and then 4 is another long one. Okay, would it be interesting to do my Victorian era story like this, or have it written modern style? Well, your base is largely going to be modern readers. There's certainly a niche group of people who will go out of their way to read older style narratives, but that's an interesting question, right? Because it's not like people are illiterate by any means. You're going to find more literacy. That might also have played, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but that might also have played a role in different writing styles. Literacy was less common. It was something tailored to universities. So most writers, people who could even read it, is written and structured by people who'd be doing like peer-reviewed papers by today's era, not your more simple what would be the comparison? The tavern board, oh, there was a word for it. It's oh, that's so annoying. It was like something yelling. Ah, dang, the word's not coming back to me. Um, but generally speaking, I would tailor it towards your audience. I think a hybrid would be really interesting, but that is something that would take a lot of refining your style. Um, and even then, it would probably be doing something as like a project or an experiment. So my personal knee-jerk reaction would be to write it in the way you are most comfortable consuming it and having it consumed, the way you would best understand its consumption for your own networking and, spreading it out for people to read. But yeah, that could also be a reason, because a lot of books up until a fairly recent time period, if you're thinking on like the scale of it, were written and distributed by people of like university grade education or higher for university grade education or higher. And in that thing, it almost becomes like a competitive nature to use longer words. Just like in an essay, why use something simple when you could pick a word that would somehow draw more attention or eyes, almost like a pageantry in writing. That's an interesting thought. I wonder if that's why. All right. It is time to get back into a narration segment. Letter 2. To Mrs. Saville, England. Archangel, 28th of March, 17th, not. How slowly time passes here, encompassed as I am by frost and snow. Yet a second step is taken towards my enterprise. I have hired a vessel, and am occupied in collecting my sailors. Those whom I have already engaged appear to be men of whom I can depend, and are certainly possessed of dauntless courage. But I have one want which I have never yet been able to satisfy, and the absence of the object of which I now feel as a most severe evil. I have no friend, Margaret. When I am glowing with the enthusiasm of success, there will be none to participate my joy. If I am assailed by disappointment, no one will endeavor to sustain me in dejection. I shall commit my thoughts to paper, it is true, but that is a poor medium for the communication of feeling. I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine. You may deem me romantic, my dear sister, but I bitterly feel the want of a friend. I have no one near me, gentle yet courageous, possessed of a cultivated as well as a capricious mind, whose tastes are like my own, to approve or amend my plans. How would such a friend repair the faults of your poor brother? I am too ardent in execution and too impatient of difficulties. But it is still a greater evil to me that I am self-educated. For the first 14 years of my life I ran wild on a common, and read nothing but our Uncle Thomas's books of voyages. At that age I became acquainted with the celebrated poets of our own country, but it was only when I had ceased to be in my power to derive its most important benefits from such a conviction that I perceived the necessity of becoming acquainted with more languages than that of my native country. Now I am 28, and am in reality more illiterate than many schoolboys of 15. It is true that I have thought more and that my daydreams are more extended and magnificent, but they want, as the painters call it, keeping. And I greatly need a friend who would have sense enough not to despise me as romantic, and affection enough for me to endeavor to regulate my mind. Well, these are useless complaints. I shall certainly find no friend on the wide ocean, nor even here in Archangel, among merchants and seamen. Yet some feelings, unallied to the dross of human nature, beat even in these rugged bosoms. My lieutenant, for instance, is a man of wonderful courage and enterprise. He is madly desirous of glory, or rather, to word my phrase more characteristically, of advancement in his profession. He is an Englishman, and in the midst of national and professional prejudices, unsoftened by cultivation, retains some of the noblest endowments of humanity. I first became acquainted with him on board a whale vessel, finding that he was unemployed in this city. I hastily engaged him to assist my enterprise. The master is a person of an excellent disposition, and is remarkable in the ship for his gentleness and the mildness of his discipline. This circumstance, added to his well-known integrity and dauntless courage, made me very desirous to engage him. A youth passed in solitude, my best years spent under your gentle and feminine fosterage, has so refined the groundwork of my character that I cannot overcome an intense distaste to the usual brutality exercised on board ship. I have never believed it to be necessary, and when I heard of a mariner equally noted for his kindness of heart, and the respect and obedience paid to him by his crew, I found myself peculiarly fortunate in being able to secure his services. I heard of him first in rather a romantic manner, from a lady who owes to him the happiness of her life. This, briefly, is his story. Some years ago he loved a young Russian lady of moderate fortune, and having amassed a considerable sum in prize money, the father of the girl consented to the match. He saw his mistress once before the destined ceremony, but she was bathed in tears, and throwing herself at his feet. I entreated him to spare her. Oh, and throwing herself at his feet, entreated him to spare her, confessed at the same time that she loved another, but that he was poor, and that her father would never consent to the union. My generous friend reassured the suppliant, and, on being informed of the name of her lover, instantly abandoned his pursuit. He had already bought a farm with his money, on which he had designed to pass the remainder of his life, but he bestowed the whole of his rival, together with the remains of his prize money, to purchase stock, and then himself solicited the young woman's father to consent to her marriage with her lover. But the old man decidedly refused, thinking himself bound in honor to my friend, who, when he found the father inexorable, quitted his country, nor returned until he heard that his former mistress was married according to her inclinations. What a noble fellow, you will exclaim. He is so, but then he is wholly uneducated. He is as silent as a Turk, and a kind of ignorant carelessness attends him, which, while it renders his conduct the more astonishing, detracts from the interest and sympathy which otherwise he would command. Yet do not suppose, because I complain a little, or because I can conceive a consolation for my toils, which I may never know, that I am wavering in my resolutions. Those are as fixed as fate, and my voyage is only now delayed until the weather shall permit my embarkation. The winter has been dreadfully severe, but the spring promises well, and it is considered as a remarkably early season, so that perhaps I may sail sooner than I expected. I shall do nothing rashly. You know me sufficiently to confide in my prudence and considerateness whenever the safety of others is committed to my care. I cannot describe to you my sensations on the near prospect of my undertaking. It is impossible to communicate to you a conception of the trembling sensation, half pleasurable and half fearful, with which I am prepared to depart. I am going to unexplored regions, to the land of mist and snow, but I shall kill no albatross. Therefore do not be alarmed for my safety, or if I should come back to you as worn and woeful as the ancient mariner. You will smile at my illusion, but I will disclose a secret. I have often attributed my attachment to, my passionate enthusiasm for, the dangerous mysteries of ocean to that production of the most imaginative of modern poets. There is something at work in my soul which I do not understand. I am practically industrious, painstaking, a workman to execute with perseverance and labor, but besides this there is a love for the marvelous, a belief in the marvelous, intertwined in all of my projects, which hurries me out of the common pathway of men, even to the wild sea and unvisited regions I am about to explore. But to render to my dearest considerations, Shall I meet you again, after having traversed immense seas and returned by the most southern cape of Africa or America? I dare not expect such success, yet I cannot bear to look on the reverse of the picture. Continue for the present to write to me by every opportunity. I may receive your letters on some occasions when I need them most to support my spirits. I love you very tenderly. Remember me with affection, should you never hear from me again. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. All right. And that is letter 2. And we'll take another 10. So, yeah, to continue your thoughts, Justin, I could see it going well, potentially. But writing, while it's set in the Victorian, it's still a somewhat modern day feel. You are having these superheroes, you are having this military conflict. Even if you want to take an older approach in your prose, it might be beneficial to have a modern feel for your audience and a approach to the prose that keeps things tailored around that. Let's see. Okay, question related to dialogue. Should I make the dialogue in my book similar to this, or sound like a modern rewrite of Victorian writing? Yeah, I would think probably if you really want to toss in the old style, I would think of it as a spice and not trying to replicate it. Don't go too hard on it, and don't try to force it into your style if it's not fitting. Um, a modern rewrite of Victorian writing, I'm not entirely sure what you're meaning by that, but I'm assuming what you're meaning is keep it in a modern voice, in a modern flow, but it has this kind of like gravitas of Victorian age writing that you're trying to capture. I think that's definitely worth a try. Just don't get lost in it. Take a few chapters, try out different formats, try out different voices and styles. Find out which one feels best to you. Don't get too fixated on an idea to make it the be-all end-all. Experiment and find what you want for your story. Particularly a story like this that you're so passionate in, would be my thought. Let's see. Hmm. So, Justin, what was your goal in horticulture, by the way? Like, do you have any larger goals with it? Or is it just, working on, say, a like hydroponics farm or like a general farm or like research? I'm curious, what's your goal? Like horticulture is something you're passionate about, and as the climate changes get more severe, I imagine it'll become even more important. So I'm curious. Ow. Actually, let me shift around a bit. Let's see, possibly a floral design for wedding planning or designing new cultivars. All right, interesting. Let's see, cultivar. What is a cultivar? Cultivar is a plant variety that has been produced in cultivation. Oh, okay. So making up some new breeds in cultivation. I see. Well, that's interesting. All right. Now, even in university, I'm sure you're familiar with like peer-reviewed papers and all that stuff for the essays. What do you think? Do you think attention spans or like the pace of consumption of information has gotten so fast that we have abbreviated the language to compensate? Or do you think it's that as public education has become more widespread and more people in the world are literate, you see a pull away from the emphasis on unnecessarily convoluted prose in favor of clearer communication? Because communication has never been more easily achievable with the internet and all these other mediums. So people are making so much more writing and so much more dialogue, whether it's actual like, narrative writing or not, just in communication. And I think that naturally encourages abbreviation of language. I feel like it depends on the person. How so? Like my brain is so hooked on this thought right now. Seeing the stark difference in like how people talk, like how we got from there to here, it's interesting to me. Because I think I see pros and cons both ways. Because like you can say so much more quickly today than a lot of these things convey with all of their eloquent prose in this bit. Like in this one, wanted a friend, found a couple of decent people. It's gonna be out, etc., etc. But all right, let's see. For instance, despite people becoming more quick on talking, peer-reviewed paper are still very slow. Exactly. That's why my thought is right. Like you see it accused in a lot of mediums, like in universities and on like media, like news, that this quote unquote degradation or expansion of slang is something that's like brought about as a negative by technology. But to me, it feels more like optimized for its purpose. When it's in university, even in modern day, even with all the technology at our fingertips, peer-reviewed papers are still very like eloquently written because they're tailored towards that audience. Whereas it just doesn't make sense to be so long-winded and potentially hard to understand on something for common consumption or general everyday consumption, because common might be misunderstood. Which I understand why these papers are slow. However, I feel like some papers should be made with their reader also in mind. So, yes, I do feel like, particularly as technology becomes more expansive, I kind of feel like a leaning towards having less emphasis on elaborate wording is a good thing, because I feel like you would want to have, rather than this 5-page essay on something that can be brought down to 1 page, you could have all these much more easily consumed peer-reviewed papers and the lists of their reviews and etc. for their sources and things, and then make it so much more easily available to people outside of the field. And you're going to need both, because there's just technical terminology that you can't shorthand. But there's other aspects of it that just aren't necessary. Like, when you're talking about, for example, hydroponics, you're not going to shorthand the nutrient fusions between your water, your dang it, I knew the words for it because I made a little hydroponics font. But largely between when you're making your liquid mix, there's your water base. You got your acid and bases for your testing on your pH tester, and you've got a couple of like bulk mixes for most people that contain a huge blend of smaller chemical substances. Um, and then after that, those terms need to be kept the terms used in the field, but they don't have to be complicated for someone to read. It doesn't need to be like, oh, the hydroponics farm was inundated with. No, you don't. It can be kept simple. Simple enough that, people can read it and get the gist, while still staying very relevant for the professionals who need the information, I feel. I don't know. Maybe I'm definitely rambling, but I I'm I find myself torn. Because on one hand, I think it's much more practical to use shorthand where applicable. But on the other hand, it's so fun when you're reading a book like this and the prose is so eloquent. So it's like a bittersweet feeling. Because you're like, oh, I wish we didn't like unnecessarily use these long and convoluted terminology where it doesn't have its place. But also, I don't want to see it not be used. I want to see it used for eloquence, for gravitas, for prose and poetry and narrative beauty. I do want to see it used for that, but I feel like it's lost its place in university to a degree. It's still used there, but it's lost its purpose. It's not serving its need. That's a good way to put it. All right, it has been 10 minutes. It is time to resume narration. Frankenstein, Letter 3. To Mrs. Saville, England. My dear sister, I write a few lines in haste to say that I am safe and well advanced on my voyage. This letter will reach England by a merchantman now on its homeward voyage from Archangel, more fortunate than I, who may not see my native land perhaps for many years. I am, however, in good spirits. My men are bold and apparently firm of purpose, nor do the floating sheets of ice that continually pass us, indicating the dangers of the region towards which we are advancing, appear to dismay them. We have already reached a very high latitude, but it is the height of summer, and although not so warm as in England, the southern gales which blow us speedily towards those shores which I so ardently desire to attain, breathe a degree of renovating warmth which I had not expected. No incidents have hitherto befallen us that would make a figure in a letter. One or two stiff gales and the springing of a leak are accidents which experienced navigators scarcely remember to record, and I shall be well content if nothing worse happens to us during our voyage. Adieu, my dear Margaret. Be assured that for my own sake, as well as yours, I will not rashly encounter danger. I will be cool, persevering, and prudent. But success shall crown my endeavours. Wherefore not? For thus I have gone, tracing a secure way over the pathless sea, and the very stars themselves being witnesses and testimonies of my triumph. Why not still proceed over the untamed yet obedient element? What can stop the determined heart and resolved will of man? My swelling heart involuntarily pours itself out thus, but I must finish. Heaven bless my beloved sister. R.W. Letter 4. To Mrs. Saville, England. So strange an accident has happened to us that I cannot forbear recording it, although it is very probable that you will see me before these papers can come into your possession. Last Monday, July 31st, we were nearly surrounded by ice, which closed in the ship on all sides, scarcely leaving her the sea room in which she floated. Our situation was somewhat dangerous, especially as we were compassed round by a very thick fog. We accordingly lay to, hoping that some change would take place in the atmosphere and weather. About 2 o'clock the mist cleared away, and we beheld, stretched out in every direction, vast and irregular plains of ice, which seemed to have no end. Some of my comrades groaned, and my own mind began to grow watchful with anxious thoughts. when a strange sight suddenly attracted our attention and diverted our solicitude from our own situation. We perceived a low carriage, fixed on the sledge and drawn by dogs, pass on towards the north, and at the distance of half a mile, a being which had the shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature, sat in the sledge and guided the dogs. We watched the rapid progress of the traveler with our telescopes until he was lost among the distant inequalities of the ice. This appearance excited our unqualified wonder. We were, as we believed, many hundreds of miles from any land, but this apparition seemed to denote that it was not, in reality, so distant as we had supposed. Stuck in, however, by ice, it was impossible to follow his track, which we had observed with the greatest attention. About 2 hours after this occurrence, we heard the ground sea, and before night the ice broke. Before night the ice broke and freed our ship. We, however, lay to until the morning, fearing to encounter in the dark those large loose masses which float about after the breaking up of the ice. I profited of this time to rest for a few hours. In the morning, however, as soon as it was light, I went upon deck and found all the sailors busy on one side of the vessel, apparently talking to someone in the sea. It was, in fact, a sledge, like that we had seen before, which had drifted towards us in the night on a large fragment of ice, only one dog remaining alive, but there was a human being within it, whom the sailors were persuading to enter the vessel. He was not, as the other travelers seemed to be, a savage inhabitant of some undiscovered land, but a European. When I appeared on the deck, the master said, "Here is our captain, and he will not allow you to perish on the open sea." On perceiving me, the stranger addressed me in English, although with a foreign accent. "Before I come on board your vessel," said he, "will you have the kindness to inform me whither you are bound?" You may conceive my astonishment on hearing such a question addressed to me from a man on the brink of destruction, and to whom I should have supposed that my vessel would have been a resource which he would not have exchanged for the most precious wealth the earth can afford. I replied, however, that we were on a voyage of discovery towards the northern pole. Upon hearing this, he appeared satisfied, and consented to come aboard. Good God, Margaret, if you had seen the man who thus capitulated for his safety, your surprise would have been boundless. His limbs were nearly frozen, and his body dreadfully emaciated by fatigue and suffering. I never saw a man in so wretched a condition. We attempted to carry him into the cabin, but as soon as he had quitted the fresh air, he fainted. We accordingly brought him back to the deck, and restored him to animation by rubbing him with brandy and forcing him to swallow a small quantity. As soon as he showed signs of life, we wrapped him up in blankets and placed him near the chimney of the kitchen stove. By slow degrees he recovered, and ate a little soup, which restored him wonderfully. 2 days passed in this manner before he was able to speak, and I often feared that his sufferings have deprived him of understanding. When he had in some measure recovered, I removed him to my own cabin, and attended on him as much as my duty would permit. I never saw a more interesting creature. His eyes have generally an expression of wildness, and even madness. But there are moments when, if anyone performs an act of kindness towards him, or does him any of the most trifling service, his whole countenance is lighted up, as it were, with a beam of benevolence and sweetness that I never saw equalled. But he is generally melancholy and despairing. Sometimes he gnashes his teeth, as if impatient of the weight of woes that oppresses him. When my guest was a little recovered, I had great trouble to keep off the men who wished to ask him 1,000 questions, but I would not allow him to be tormented by their idle curiosity. In a state of body and mind whose restoration evidently depended upon entire repose. Once, however, the lieutenant asked why he had come so far upon the ice in so strange a vehicle. His countenance instantly assumed an aspect of the deepest gloom, and he replied, "To seek the one who fled from me." "And did the man whom you pursued travel in the same fashion?" "Yes." "Then I fancy we have seen him. For the day before we picked you up, we saw some dogs drawing a sledge with a man in it across the ice. This aroused the stranger's attention, and he asked a multitude of questions concerning the route which the daemon, as he called him, had pursued. Soon after, when he was alone with me, he said, I have doubtless excited your curiosity. Oh, hang on. I have doubtless excited your curiosity, as well as that of those good people. But you are too considerate to make inquiries. Certainly. Certainly. It would indeed be very impertinent and inhuman of me to trouble you with my inquisitiveness of mine. And yet you rescued me from a strange and perilous situation. You have benevolently restored me to life. Soon after this he inquired if I thought the breaking up of the ice had destroyed the other sledge. I replied that I could not answer with any degree of certainty, for the ice had not broken until near midnight, and the traveller might have arrived at a place of safety before that time. But of this I could not judge. From this time a new spirit of life animated the decaying frame of the stranger. He manifested the greatest eagerness to be upon deck, to watch for the sledge which had before appeared. But I have persuaded him to remain in the cabin, for he is far too weak to sustain the rawness of the atmosphere. I have promised that someone should watch for him, and give him instant notice if any new object should appear in sight. Such is my journal of what relates to this strange occurrence to the present day. The stranger has gradually improved in health, but is very silent and appears uneasy when anyone except myself enters his cabin. Yet his manners are so conciliating and gentle that the sailors are all interested in him, although they have had very little communication with him. For my own part, I begin to love him as a brother, and his constant and deep grief fills me with sympathy and compassion. He must have been a noble creature in his better days, being even now in wreck so attractive and amiable. I said in one of my letters, my dear Margaret, that I should find no friend on the wide ocean. Yet I have found a man who, before his spirit had been broken by misery, I should have been happy to have possessed as the brother of my heart. I shall continue my journal concerning the stranger at intervals, should I have any fresh incidents to record. I will pause here, so that I may catch my breath and check on chat. Okay. Yes, I do think it would be helpful to have it more publicly consumable for peer-reviewed papers. I also think making them... Oh, just got a Pokemon you need? Congratulations. I also think making them in a way that's more easily reviewable, more quickly able to go through. I say that hesitantly because I think peer reviewing should take time. Like, it is meant to be a significant thing. But I was assigned to have reinforcing and to make basically peer referenced through peer reviewed articles, essays. And as I was going through and doing my research, they all felt so regurgitated. It wasn't like there was... It didn't feel like a forum of discussion or a facilitating list of articles. Granted, I was going through the college's basically library of articles, so it wasn't in a forum setting, but it just felt bland. Like, I could even find, just by looking carefully, for practically any topic, peer-reviewed articles in direct contention so that I could really argue any point I wanted. And while they still had all this great backing and you were able to make sure, like a news station is supposed to, that what you were saying was true, you could paint the truth so leadingly that it didn't matter to the reader what the facts were, because the message could be whatever you wanted it to be, backed by statistics and worded implications through careful leading of the reader. It almost made all of the hard work of the peer reviewing feel less significant because it's not going to be able to sway or become more widely understood. What is the AG extension service? I am not familiar. And while you write that out, I am quickly going to take a be right back so I can stretch my legs and get some soda. It is the Agriculture Extension Service. It is basically a resource that people can use to help understand agriculture related topics. That would make more sense to me as well. I feel like it could be done in that approach. Or using that would be a better approach than what we're doing with peer reviewed. Because I feel like peer reviews is still kind of like a legacy. Um, I think people forget how much of what we do today is born on the foundation of the past. For example, accreditation for universities is based on agreements, treaties, and structures from generations ago and further. Same for peer-reviewed articles and the regulation of trades. So, a lot of times, unfortunately, to improve upon a system, you have to apply something like new and fresh. Hello, Violet Angel. It has been forever. How are you doing? That is good soda. Shout out. Violet Angel. Welcome in.
Got a little excited. That's my bad.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad things are getting...
10,000, 1,000, 2,000. Oh my god, that is my, oh my, I don't even know how to do math now. What? So that's the 12,000 bits. Oh my
I'm sorry that things are still rough. I'm glad that it sounds with your tone and seeing you stream more often that things are starting to get a little bit better, though. It really is good to see you again. I am changing my formatting somewhat at present. Writing wasn't feeling as entertaining as it should have been for me. Like, the chatting sections with people was definitely entertaining enough, but the writing was just filler. So I'm trying to make my streams much more enjoyable and approachable. I've been told by numerous people at this point. There are those that don't get bothered by it, they read it and they breach the conversation, but there is still enough that have been telling me that they see me writing, they see me focus, and they just don't want to interrupt, that I figured I should switch to something different so that people feel like they can chat. What I'm doing here is I'm doing segments of just chatting and narration. Right now we're in a just chatting segment. Soon we'll be back into the narration segment again. And I don't reply to chats during narration, but I do once it gets back into a just chatting segment. Nice. Have you been enjoying the narration? I hope it's doing well. It's a bit experimental for me at this stage, but I'm hoping it's good. Nice. I've been hanging in there. And that is 1 hour and 3. It has been about 12 minutes. Let us resume a narration segment. Log. August 13th, 1700. My affection for my guest increases every day. He excites at once my admiration and my pity to an astonishing degree. How can I see so noble a creature destroyed by misery without feeling the most poignant grief? He is so gentle, yet so wise. His mind is so cultivated, and when he speaks, although his words are culled with the choicest art, yet they flow with rapidity and unparalleled eloquence. He is now much recovered from his illness, and is continually on the deck, apparently watching for the sledge that preceded his own. Yet, although unhappy, he is not so utterly occupied by his own misery, but that he interests himself deeply in the projects of others. He has frequently conversed with me on mine, which I have communicated to him without disguise. He entered attentively into all of my arguments in favor of my eventual success, and into every minute detail of the measures I had taken to secure it. I was easily led by the sympathy which he invited me to use the language of my heart, to give utterance to the burning ardor of my soul, and to say, with all the fervor that warmed me, how gladly I would sacrifice my fortune, my existence, my every hope, to the furtherance of my enterprise. One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of the knowledge which I sought, for the dominion I should acquire and transmit over the elemental foes of our race. As I spoke, a dark gloom spread over my listener's countenance. At first I perceived that he tried to suppress his emotion. He placed his hands before his eyes, and my voice quivered and failed me as I beheld tears trickle fast from between his fingers. A groan burst from his heaving breast. I paused. At length he spoke, in broken accents. Unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught? Hear me, let me reveal my tale, and you will dash the cup from your lips." Such words, you may imagine, strongly excited my curiosity, but the paroxysm of grief that had seized the stranger overcame his weakened powers, and many hours of repose and tranquil conversation were necessary to restore his composure. Having conquered the violence of his feelings, he appeared to despise himself for being the slave of passion, and quelled the dark tyranny of despair. He led me again to converse concerning myself personally. He asked me the history of my earlier years. The tale was quickly told, but it awakened various trains of reflection. I spoke of my desire of finding a friend, of my thirst for a more intimate sympathy with a fellow mind than had ever fallen to my lot, and expressed my conviction that a man could boast of little happiness who did not enjoy this blessing. "I agree with you," replied the stranger. "We are old-fashioned creatures, but half made up if one wiser, better, dearer than ourselves. Such a friend ought to be. Do not lend this aid to perfectionate our weak and faulty natures. I once had a friend, the most noble of human creatures, and am entitled, therefore, to judge respecting friendship. You have hope, and the world before you, and have no cause for despair, but I have lost everything, and cannot begin life anew." As he said this, his countenance became expressive of a calm, settled grief that touched me to the heart. But he was silent, and presently retired to his cabin. Even broken in his spirit as he is, no one can feel more deeply than he does the beauties of nature. The starry sky, the sea, and every sight afforded by these wonderful regions seem still to have the power of elevating his soul from earth. Such a man has a doubled existence. He may suffer misery and be overwhelmed by disappointments, yet when he has retired into himself, he will be like a celestial spirit that has a halo around him, within whose circle no grief or folly ventures. Will you smile at the enthusiasm I express concerning this divine wanderer? You would not if you saw him. You have been tutored and refined by books and retirement from the world, and you are therefore somewhat fastidious. But this only renders you the more fit to appreciate the extraordinary merits of this wonderful man. Sometimes I have endeavored to discover what quality it is which he possesses that elevates him so immeasurably above any other person I ever knew. I believe it to be an intuitive discernment, a quick but never failing power of judgment, a penetration into the causes of things, unequaled for clearness and precision. Add to this a facility of expression and a voice whose varied intonations are soul-subduing music. And break. Yeah, I mean, it's been a little bit crazy. It has, but c'est la vie. So, I hadn't even really heard of let's see. AG extension service before, which sounds like a shame because it seems really well designed. It seems designed with the purpose to help people with this to better understand agricultural growth. I feel like that is a shame that it's not better known. Oh man, I had to catch myself on some of these words. They are long. What was that one up there earlier? It was do, 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 do. Paroxysm isn't long, but it's a weird one on the tongue. Countenance, no, that's easy. It was something like accuracy. It was like a compound word. I didn't know English had too many compound words. Decorating a hydro flask? Nice. Let's see. Actually, refreshing my memory. What is a hydro flask? Like, I'm sure it's obviously a flask for water. Hydro. Oh, those ones. Okay, yeah. Those water bottles. Those are super handy. So I've noticed you start streaming again, Violet. Sorry the time zones aren't really lining up too well on that. In a pretty different time zone now. But how have they been going? Hope they've been going quite well. Oh, also, I'm sorry. I think you sent me a message way back and I never got back to it. I am sorry about that. I'm getting a lot more messages lately. A cooking video. Very cool. On the server. Oh, okay. I think I might have briefly seen that. Hang on. It would be under that, and then that was. Oh, yes. Yep, yep, I remember that one. Cool. Generally, I try not to change the accents of characters once I establish them, but I was not able to maintain the first accent for Frankenstein. I'm needing to turn into like a Germanish accent, something like this, because otherwise it's just a weird variant of Englishman, and I'm not switching back and forth between them smoothly, so I need something that's rather distinct and awkward and like distinctly different with your mouth movements so that I can properly give him a new voice. I exaggerate it a smidge, but quick switching voice is something I need to re-practice on. Uh, I see that. Drunk Sean Connery. Justin, you don't do that to me. Oh. Oh my word. Oh. That's fair. It just got me. Like Oh, that got me good. All right. Uh, yeah, when, like, professionally speaking, if I'm doing a high end narration, not like a live narration like this is like story time narration, kind of like gathered around the group reading it out proper. But for like a voice over narration, my thought is generally for the best approach. After you've taken time, you've read through it, you get the feel of the inner voice of each character. You pick an accent if it's not already assigned, like it's not a known accent. And then you don't record it in order. You record each person segments, like kind of like how you go through a play practice. You have each part and you say their lines and you work your way through your lines of the play. Um, you might pause and break your recording so that you can give yourself context for emotional aspect of it. But to maintain, at my level anyway, the best and most consistent accent for the character so that there's less variation between recording, you want to say, for example, record Frankenstein. You want to record all of his voice parts with pauses in between for editing purposes. Like, for example, here's a quote. Yesterday the stranger said to me, You may easily perceive you may easily perceive, Captain Walton, that I have suffered great and unparalleled misfortunes. I had determined at one time that the memory of these evils should die with me, but you have won me to alter my determinations. You seek for knowledge and wisdom, as I once did, and I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes, yada, 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 yada. Once it finishes, down here, of which it is composed, then I would carry on to the next one, like 3 seconds pause. And the reason you do that is that it allows clipping, like it allows when you're breaking up audio pieces in editing, it allows you to split and separate and put back in. Because you can't exactly or cleanly just input a pause of breath, but it is much more easy to shorten one. So having a pause of breath, whether you need it or not, allows you to remove it when it's not necessary, but have it when it's needed. Allowing me to say, record all of Frankenstein's part, skip. Record his next part or whatever. And then put together all the audios in order by character when the accent stays the same. Because my accent for our main in the letter has stayed consistent. My accent for Frankenstein at this point, because I'm starting fresh each time, is like each time a fresh accent slightly, because I'm not getting it perfectly remade. It's not a practiced accent. If that makes sense. Speaking of, it is about time for our next narration segment. Excuse me. Let me straighten up my back again. Yesterday the stranger said to me, You may easily perceive, Captain Walton, that I have suffered great and unparalleled misfortunes. I had determined at one time that the memory of these evils should die with me, but you have won me to alter my determination. You seek for knowledge and wisdom, as I once did, and I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be a serpent to sting you, as mine has been. I do not know that the relation of my disasters will be useful to you, Yet when I reflect that you are pursuing the same course, exposing yourself to the same dangers which have rendered me what I am, I imagine that you may deduce an apt moral from my tale, one that may direct you if you succeed in your undertaking, and console you in case of failure. Prepare to hear of occurrences which are usually deemed marvelous, where we among the tamest scenes of nature, I might fear. Ah, dang it. Not where. Were we among the tamer scenes of nature, I might fear to encounter your unbelief, perhaps your ridicule, but many things will appear possible in those wild and mysterious regions, which would provoke the laughter of those. Oh, dang it. But many things will appear possible in those wild and mysterious regions, which would provoke the laughter of those unacquainted with the ever-varied powers of nature. Nor can I doubt but that my tale conveys in its series internal evidence of the truth of the events of which it is composed. You may easily imagine that I was much gratified by the offered communication. Yet I could not endure that he should renew his grief by a recital of his misfortunes. I felt the greatest... Oh, dang it! It ended. It's back to the old voice. I did not see the end of the quotes. This whole take is terrible. I think I need to restart this take. There are so many errors. All right. Yesterday the stranger said to me, "You may easily perceive, Captain Walton, that I have suffered great and unparalleled misfortunes. I had determined at one time that the memory of these evils should die with me, but you have won me to alter my determination. You seek for knowledge and wisdom, as I once did, and I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be a serpent to sting you, as mine have been. I do not know that the relation of my disasters will be useful to you, yet when I reflect that you are pursuing the same course, exposing yourself to the same dangers which have rendered me for what I am, I imagine that you may deduce an apt moral from my tale, the one that may direct you if you succeed in your undertaking, and console you in the case of failure. Prepare to hear of occurrences which are usually deemed marvelous. Were we among the tamer scenes of nature, I might fear to encounter your unbelief, perhaps your ridicule. But many things will appear possible in these wild and mysterious regions, which would provoke the laughter of those unacquainted with the ever-varied powers of nature. Nor can I doubt but that my tale conveys in its series internal evidence of the truth of the events of which it is composed. You may easily imagine that I was much gratified by the offered communication. Yet I could not endure that he should renew his grief by a recital of his misfortunes. I felt the greatest eagerness to hear the promised narrative, partly from curiosity, and partly from a strong desire to ameliorate his fate, if it were in my power. I expressed these feelings in my answer. "I thank you," he replied, "for your sympathy, but it is useless. My fate is nearly fulfilled. I wait but for one event, and then I shall repose in peace. I understand your feeling," continued he, perceiving that I wished to interrupt him. "But you are mistaken, my friend. If thus you will allow me to name you, nothing can alter my destiny. Listen to my history, and you will perceive how irrevocably it is determined." He then told me that he would commence his narrative the next day, when I should be at leisure. This promise drew from me the warmest thanks. I resolved every night, when I am not imperatively occupied by my duties, to record, as nearly as possible, in his own words, what he has related during the day. If I should be engaged, I will at least make notes. This manuscript will doubtless afford you the greatest pleasure, but to me, who knew him, and who hear it from his own lips, with what interest and sympathy shall I read it in some future day? Even now, as I commence my task, his full-toned voice swells in my ears. His lustrous eyes dwell on me with all their melancholy sweetness. I see his thin hand raised in animation, while the lineaments of his face are irradiated by the soul within. Strange and harrowing must be his story. Frightful the storm which embraced the gallant vessel on its course and wrecked it thus. Yeah, that was a better take. That was definitely a better take. All right, health check time. Stretch. Yeah. Oh my word, that first take was terrible. And hydrate. So, are you enjoying the narration, Justin? Part of the idea came from the fact that I narrated on YouTube, and I'd been kind of playing around with the thoughts, but I was influenced somewhat. It definitely helped me return my sense of confidence when that other day you asked, what was it, some Christmas thing. That was a good take on the first one, and I was pretty proud that I got such a decent take on that first run through. I am by no means a professional voice actor, but it feels good to get back into it. I have so much I need to refine though. Yeah, 'twas the night before Christmas. That was the one. You know, it is weird how that works though, Justin, going back a few conversations. There's all sorts of programs, like a surprising amount, that are available for people to use. And yet, um, they're just not well known. Like, it's surprising when you think about it, because I have learned of a great deal of resources available that I just didn't know about. Okay. And let's... Nope. Nope. That's not going to work. Okay. There we go. That should keep it looking nice. Maybe a little lower. Yeah, that'll do. All right. Like, heck, this resource, for example, I didn't think to look out for it, but there are a lot of stuff that have gone into public domain territory. I've just been having you read while I've been playing Pokemon. It's been very good. Listening to Frankenstein's audiobook while you play Pokemon. That's awesome. My word, that's perfect. It's like me doing like, oh yeah, I'm gonna play Helldivers on like 7th difficulty. Let me put on some music for this. Oh, what music are we gonna put on? Like lo-fi beats to relax and chill to. Ain't the first time? Oh, I am sure. I am sure. Alright. Well, I can't really think of anything for a conversation topic at this moment without rehashing things. I need to prep some more things to talk to myself about. I had the Invisible Man audiobook on. Huh. I've not heard of that book. I mean, assuming it's about an invisible man, but are we talking like superhero invisible man? Or are we talking like a metaphorical sense? Like someone who just blends into society? H.G. Wells, The Invisible Man. Okay, H.G. Wells, The Invisible Man. H.G. Wells. In... Wait, The Invisible Man is in public domain, I believe. Yeah, it's in public domain now. Let's see. The Invisible Man is a science fiction novel by H.G. Wells, originally serialized. It was published, yada yada. Sometimes there's... Uh, meanwhile... Oh, I see. That looks like it might be interesting to read. It's not that long either. 149 pages? Huh. All right. Interesting. All right. 1 hour and 32 minutes in. I think it is time for another reading burst. Frankenstein, or Modern Prometheus, Chapter 1. I am by birth a Genovese, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been for many years councillors and syndics, and my father had... Wait, Genovese. I actually have a region. What do the Genovese sound like? What? And I'll look into it later. It's this whole first things take is rough anyway. Let's see. With some elements of a French novel called The Murder Invisible added in. Oh, okay, okay. I am by birth... At the beginning of the stream, once I start narrating, I won't do chat. Me. Clearly, this was a lie. All right, let's start this fresh, cause I'm bad at this. Frankenstein or a Modern Prometheus, Chapter 1. I am by birth a Genovese, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been for many years councillors and syndics, and my father had filled several public situations with honour and reputation. He was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and indefatigable attention to public business. He passed his younger days perpetually occupied by the affairs of his country. A variety of circumstances had prevented his marrying early, nor was it until the decline of life that he became a husband and the father of a family. As the circumstances of his marriage illustrate his character, I cannot refrain from relating them. One of his most intimate friends was a merchant who, from a flourishing state, fell, through numerous mischances, into poverty. This man, whose name was Buffet, was of a proud and unbending disposition, and could not bear to live in poverty and oblivion in the same country where he had formerly been distinguished for his rank and magnificence. Having paid his debts, therefore, in the most honourable manner, he retreated with his daughter to the town of Lucrine, where he lived unknown and in wretchedness. My father loved Beaufort with the truest friendship, and was deeply grieved by his retreat in these unfortunate circumstances. He bitterly deplored the false pride which led his friend to a conduct so little worthy of the affection that united them. He lost no time in endeavoring to seek him out, with the hope of persuading him to begin the world again through his credit and assistance. Beaufort had taken effectual measures to conceal himself, and it was 10 months before my father discovered his abode. Overjoyed at this discovery, he hastened to the house, which was situated in a mean street near the Ruse. But when he entered, misery and despair alone welcomed him. Beaufort had saved but a very small sum of money from the wreck of his fortunes, but it was sufficient to provide him with sustenance for some months, and in the meantime he hoped to procure some respectable employment at a merchant's house. This interval was, consequently, spent in inaction. His grief only became more deep and rankling when he had leisure for reflection, and at length it took so fast hold of his mind that at the end of 3 months he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of any exertion. His daughter attended him with the greatest tenderness, but she saw with despair that their little fund was rapidly decreasing, and that there was no other prospect of support. But Caroline Beaufort possessed a mind of uncommon mould, and her courage rose to support her in adversity. She procured plain work, she plaited straw, and by various means contrived to earn a pittance scarcely sufficient to support life. Several months passed in this manner. Her father grew worse. Her time was more entirely occupied in attending him. Her means of subsistence decreased, and in the 10th month her father died in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This last blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly. When my father entered the chamber, he came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who committed herself to his care, and after the interment of his friend, he conducted her to Geneva, and placed her under the protection of a relation. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. There was a considerable difference between the ages of my parents, but this circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in bonds of devoted affection. There was a sense of justice in my father's upright mind which rendered it necessary that he should approve highly to love strongly. Perhaps during former years he had suffered from the late discovered unworthiness of one beloved, and so was disposed to set a greater value on tried worth. There was a show of gratitude and worship in his attachment to my mother, differing wholly from the doting fondness of age, for it was inspired by reverence for her virtues and a desire to be the means of, in some small degree, recompensing her for the sorrows she had endured, but which gave inexpressible grace to his behavior to her. Everything was made to yield to her wishes and her convenience. He strove to shelter her, as a fair exotic is sheltered by the gardener, from every rougher wind, and to surround her with all that could tend to excite pleasurable emotion in her soft and benevolent mind. Her health, and even the tranquillity of her hitherto constant spirit, had been shaken by what she had gone through. During the 2 years that had elapsed previous to their marriage, my father had gradually relinquished all his public functions, and immediately after their union they sought the pleasant climate of Italy, and the change of scene and interest attendant on a tour through that land of wonders as a restorative for her weakened frame. From Italy they visited Germany and France. I, their eldest child, was born at Naples, and as an infant accompanied them in their rambles. I remained for several years their only child. Much as they were attached to each other, they seemed to draw inexhaustible stores of affection from a very mine of love to bestow them upon me. My mother's tender caress and my father's smile of benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections. I was their plaything and their idol, and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up to good, and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery. According as they fulfilled their duties towards me, with this deep consciousness of what they owed towards the being to which they had given life, added to the active spirit of tenderness that animated both, it may be imagined that while during every hour of my infant life I received a lesson of patience, of charity, and of self-control, I was so guided by a silken cord that all seemed but one train of enjoyment to me. For a long time I was their only care. My mother had much desire to have a daughter, but I continued their single offspring. When I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of the Lake of Como. Their benevolent disposition often made them enter the cottages of the poor. This, to my mother, was more than a duty. It was a necessity, a passion, remembering what she had suffered, and how she had been relieved, for her to act in her turn the guardian angel to the afflicted. During one of their walks, a poor cot in the foldings of a veil attracted their notice as being singularly disconsolate, while the number of half-clothed children gathered about it spoke of penury in its worst shape. One day, when my father had gone by himself to Milan, my mother, accompanied by me, visited this abode. She found a peasant and his wife, hard-working, bent down by care and labor, distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babes. Among these there was one which attracted my mother far above the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants. This child was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, and despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction upon her head. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the moulding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as of a distinct species, as being heaven sent, and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. I'll take a break there. It's been about 10 minutes. An odd history fact. H.G. Wells sold the rights to The Invisible Man while he was still alive. Okay. Is there a reason? Ah. Cracking the neck. A little bit sleepy. Do 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 do. All right. Stretch. Stretch. The Invisible Man movie made in 1933. Gotcha. Huh. That makes me curious. What was the oldest movie made? What is the oldest movie? The Round Hay Garden Scene is a short silent motion picture filmed by French inventor and Louis. 1888. We have had motion film since 1888. Damn. Of the oldest surviving film. When was motion picture invented? The cinematography, a projector that could show 16 frames per second, was introduced in 1895. So the 1888 would have had to use something prior. Oh, a kinetoscope machine in 1891. So still around the 1890 era. Wow, we have had motion picture for longer than I thought. All right. Well, chat is currently a bit quiet, and we're mid-chapter, so I think I will go back into narration for now. The peasant women, perceiving that my mother fixed eyes of wonder and admiration on this lovely girl, eagerly communicated her history. She was not her child, but the daughter of a Milanese nobleman. Her mother was a German and had died on giving her birth. The infant had been placed with these good people to nurse. They were better off then. They had not been long married. Oh, they were better off then. They had not been long married, and their eldest child was but just born. The father of their charge was one of those Italians, nursed in the memory of the antique glory of Italy, one among the Civi Ognor Schiavi Ognor Frementi, who exerted himself to obtain the liberty of his country. He became the victim of its weakness. Whether he had died or still lingered in the dungeons of Austria was not known. His property was confiscated, his child became an orphan and beggar. She continued with her foster parents and bloomed in their rude abode, fairer than a garden rose among dark-leaved brambles. When my father returned from Milan, he found playing with me in the hall of our villa a child fairer than pictured cherub, a creature who seemed to shed radiance from her looks and whose form and motions were lighter than the chamois of the hills. The aberration was soon explained. With his permission, my mother prevailed on her rustic guardians to yield their charge to her. They were fond of the sweet orphan. Her presence had seemed a blessing to them, but it would be unfair to her to keep her in poverty and want when Providence afforded her such powerful protection. They consulted their village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth Lavenza became the inmate of my parents' house, my more than sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. Everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and almost reverential attachment with which all regard her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, "I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally, and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. Yeesh. We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. Ugh. Yeah, not everything age is nice, but this is still much better than the other one. Duolingo done. Sweet. Sorry, still decorating. Gotcha. No worries. How goes decorating the Hydro Flask? Find any good stickers? What language are you working on, Justin, by the way? I'm not sure I will make it the full 3 hours today. That might be something to build up into. Duolingo actually has Klingon? Hang on, I gotta say this, hang on. Duolingo Klingon. Oh my word, it does. It does. What? that that's awesome. Oh my word, that's brilliant. That is proper brilliant. Oh man. All right. So, I've been wondering, right? Like, I'm trying to think about how I want to take the channel forward and improve upon it. And I think this PNG is pretty good. It's definitely been growing on me as I've added, like, the eye closing motion to it. Still very, very, very bones. I'm by no means an artist. But I'm trying to think about how I want to go forward. And I'm thinking for, like, more my more full send narration ones, I'm thinking of making a animated, like basically a GIF, and it would be like the emote runes, like a chibi rune. And I can't decide whether I want it to be like reading from the book directly, and the animation is kind of like it flipping through the pages, Or like, I don't know, maybe like talking into a microphone. I don't know. Probably the pages. I'm just thinking about like how I should have it look. I am thinking of like maybe though it'll definitely bring up the price, I would imagine. Having it so that the shadow form turns the page, because I mean my character's a void mage and it hasn't really been a thing, but that, still. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think? What do you guys think? This PNG, maybe a little bit more refined, a little bit more animated up, or like a chibi PNG for like a static narration where it's not live stream. Not like static narration, but like it won't be a live stream. It won't be like having chat segments. It will just be like a recording. Well, yeah, I mean it is my choice. Sure. I'm just thinking like what do you guys see as the pros and cons to better understand? Because I have a certain aim for it, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I am starting to get narrated out though. Let's see. I'm wondering if I should call it about 2 hours or try to switch over to a game. Yeah, that could be an interesting approach for it. I think for my HFY series, I probably want to go for the chibi. But maybe more high end narrations could be. Yeah, that makes a fair bit of sense. All right, I think that's been about 10 minutes. All right. Frankenstein, or A Modern Prometheus, Chapter 2. We were brought up together. There was not quite a year difference in our ages. I need not say that we were strangers to any species of disunion or dispute. Harmony was the soul of our companionship, and the diversity and contrast that subsisted in our characters drew us nearer together. Elizabeth was of a calmer and more concentrated disposition, but with all my ardour, I was capable of a more intense application, and was more deeply smitten with a thirst for knowledge. She busied herself with following the aerial creations of the poets, and in the majestic and wondrous scenes which surrounded our Swiss home. The sublime shapes of the mountains, the changes of the seasons, tempest and calm, the silence of winter, and the life and turbulence of our alpine summers. She found ample scope for admiration and delight, while my companion contemplated with a serious and satisfied spirit the magnificent appearances of things. I delighted in investigating their causes. The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. Curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature, gladness akin to rapture as they were unfolded to me, are among the earliest sensations I can remember. On the birth of a second son, my junior by 7 years, my parents gave up entirely their wandering life and fixed themselves in their native country. We possessed a house in Geneva and a that doesn't look like champ. That's Campagne? And a Campagne on Bellerive, the eastern shore of the lake, at the distance of rather more than a league from the city. We resided principally in the latter, and the lives of my parents were passed into considerable seclusion. It was my temper to avoid a crowd, and to attach myself fervently to a few. I was indifferent, therefore, to my schoolfellows in general, but I united myself in the bonds of the closest friendship to one among them. Henry Clerval was the son of a merchant of Geneva. He was a boy of singular talent and fancy. He loved enterprise, hardship, and even danger for its own sake. He was deeply read in books of chivalry and romance. He composed heroic songs and began to write many a tale of enchantment and knightly adventure. He tried to make us act plays and to enter into masquerades in which the characters were drawn from the heroes of Roncesvalles, of the Round Table of King Arthur, and the chivalrous train who shed their blood to redeem the Holy Sepulchre from the hands of the infidels. No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. My parents were possessed by the very spirit of kindness and indulgence. We felt that they were not the tyrants to rule our lot according to their caprice, but the agents and creators of all the many delights which we enjoyed. When I mingled with other families, I distinctly discerned how peculiarly fortunate my lot was, and gratitude assisted the development of filial love. My temper was sometimes violent, and my passions vehement, but by some law in my temperature they were tuned not towards childish pursuits, but to an eager desire to learn, and not to learn all things indiscriminately. I confess that neither the structure of languages, nor the code of governments, nor the politics of various states possessed attractions for me. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn. And whether it was the outward substance of things, or the inner spirit of nature and the mysterious soul of man that occupied me, still my inquiries were directed to the metaphysical, or in its highest sense, the physical secrets of the world. Meanwhile, Clervicle occupied himself, so to speak, with the moral relations of things. The busy stage of life, the virtues of heroes, and the actions of men were his theme, and his hope and his dream was to become one amongst those whose names are recorded in story as the gallant and adventurous benefactors of our species. The saintly soul of Elizabeth shone like a shrine-dedicated lamp in our peaceful home. Her sympathy was ours, her smile, her soft voice, the sweet glance of her celestial eyes, were ever there to bless and animate us. She was a living spirit of love to soften and attract. I might have become sullen in my study, rough and through the ardour of my nature, but that she was there to subdue me to a semblance of her own gentleness, and Clerval could aught ill entrench on the noble spirit of Clerval, yet he might not have been so perfectly humane, so thoughtful in his generosity, so full of kindness and tenderness amongst his passion for adventurous exploit, had she not unfolded to him the real loveliness of beneficence, and made the doing good the end and aim of his soaring ambition. I feel exquisite pleasure in dwelling on the recollections of childhood before misfortune had tainted my mind, and changed its bright visions of extensive usefulness into gloomy and narrow reflections upon self. Besides, in drawing the picture of my early days, I also recalled those events which led, by insensible steps, to my after tale of misery. For when I would account to myself for the birth of that passion which afterwards ruled my destiny, I find it arise, like a mountain river, from ignoble and almost forgotten sources, but swelling as it proceeded, it became the torrent which in its course has swept away all my hopes and joys. Natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate. I desire, therefore, in this narration, to state those facts which led to my predilection for that science. When I was 13 years of age, we all went on a party of pleasure to the baths near Thonon. The inclemency of the weather obliged us to remain a day confined to the inn. In this house I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius Agrippa. I opened it with apathy. The theory which he admits to demonstrate and the wonderful facts which he relates soon changed this feeling into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to dawn upon my mind. I should redo that. I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius Agrippa. I opened it with apathy. The theory which he attempts to demonstrate and the wonderful facts which he relates soon changed this feeling into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to dawn upon my mind, and bounding with joy, I communicated this discovery to my father. My father looked carelessly at the title page of my book and said, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash." If, instead of this remark, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles of Agrippa had been entirely exploded, and that a modern system of science had been introduced which possessed much greater powers than the ancient, because the powers of the latter were chimeral, while those of the former were real and practical, soon under such circumstances I would certainly have thrown Agrippa aside, and have contented my imagination, warmed as it was, by returning with greater ardor to my former studies. It is even possible that the train of my ideas would never have received the fatal impulse that led to my ruin. But the cursory glance my father had taken of my volume by no means assured me that he was acquainted with its contents, and I continued to read with the greatest avidity. When I returned home, my first care was to procure the whole works of this author, and afterwards of Parac Parac Paris Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. I read and studied the wild fancies of these writers with delight. They appeared to me treasures known to few besides myself. I have described myself as always having been imbued with a fervent longing to penetrate the secrets of nature. In spite of the intense labor and wonderful discoveries of modern philosophers, I always came from my studies discontented and unsatisfied. Sir Isaac Newton is said to have avowed that he felt like a child picking up shells beside the great and unexplored ocean of truth. Those of his successors in each branch of natural philosophy with whom I was acquainted appeared, even to my boy's apprehensions, as tyros engaged in the same pursuit. The untaught peasant beheld the elements around him, and was acquainted with their practical uses. The most learned philosopher knew little more. He had partially unveiled the face of nature, but her immortal lineaments were still a wonder and a mystery. He might dissect, anatomize, and give names, but not to speak of a final cause. Causes in their secondary and tertiary grades were utterly unknown to him. I had gazed upon the fortifications and impediments that seemed to keep human beings from entering the citadel of nature, and rashly and ignorantly I had repined. But here were books, and here were men who had penetrated deeper and knew more. I took their word for all that they averred, and I became their disciple. It may appear strange that such should arise in the 18th century, but while I followed the routine of education in the schools of Geneva, I was, to a great degree, self-taught with regard to my favorite studies. My father was not scientific, and I was left to struggle with a child's blindness, added to a student's thirst for knowledge. Under the guidance of my new preceptors, I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. But the latter soon attained my undivided attention. Wealth was an inferior object, but what glory could attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death? Nor were these my only visions. The raising of ghosts or devils was a promise liberally accorded by my favorite authors, the fulfillment of which I most eagerly sought. And if my incantations were always unsuccessful, I attributed the failure rather to my own inexperience and mistake than to a want of skill or fidelity in my instructors. And thus for a time I was occupied by exploded systems, mingling like an unadept 1,000 contradictory theories, and floundering desperately in a very slough of multifarious knowledge, guided by an ardent imagination and childish reasoning, till an accident again changed the current of my ideas. While I was about 15 years old, we had retired to our house near Bellerive, when we witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of the heavens. I remained, while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak which stood about 20 yards from our house, and so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. When we visited it the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. Before this, I was not unacquainted with the more obvious laws of electricity. On this occasion, a man of great research in natural philosophy was with us, and excited by this catastrophe, he entered on the explanation of a theory which he had formed on the subject of electricity and galvanism, which was at once new and astonishing to me. All that he had all that he said threw greatly into the shade Cornelius Agrippa, Albertus Magnus, and Paracelsus, the lords of my imagination, but by some fatality the overthrow of these men disinclined me to pursue my accustomed studies. It seemed to me as if nothing would or could ever be known. All that had so long engaged my attention suddenly grew despicable. By one of those caprices of the mind which we are perhaps most subject to in early youth, I at once gave up my former occupations, set down natural history and all its progeny as a deformed and abortive creation, and entertained the greatest disdain for a would-be science which could never even step within the threshold of real knowledge. In this mode of mind, I betook myself to the mathematics and the branches of study appertaining to that science as being built upon secure foundations, and so worthy of my consideration. Thus strangely are our souls constructed, and by such slight ligaments are we bound to prosperity or ruin. When I look back, it seems to me as if this almost miraculous change of inclination and will was the immediate suggestion of the guardian angel of my life, the last effort made by the spirit of preservation to avert the storm that was even then hanging in the stars and ready to envelop me. Her victory was announced by an unusual tranquillity and gladness of soul which followed the relinquishing of my ancient and latterly tormenting studies. It was thus that I was to be taught to associate evil with their persecution, happiness with their disregard. It was a strong effort of the spirit of good, but it was ineffectual. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. All right. Well, I mean, yeah, I could probably see that, Dr. Jekyll. I think that will do for today's narration. My voice is starting to get hoarse. Whew. All right. Letters in 2 chapters. Not too bad. Not too bad. Let's see. Who we got on? Excuse me. Let's go with Apple Moose. Okay. Let's see. Get that ready. All right, so we will be rating Apple Moose. Was that it? Yes, Apple Moose. Okay, raid channel. Look for Apple Moose. I'm not seeing a result. Oh, they just ended. Okay. All right. Let me find my chat. Okay. I want. Where is it? Do. Okay. let's get that sent. Scroll all the way down. I will refund you those points and then get that done. All right, let's look for a channel to raid. I see. Let's go with Marukiko. Marukiko is a long friend of the channel and a very entertaining person. And let's all give a very warm raid to them. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. I hope you all have an amazing day. And please, stay awesome.